Why he still watches you from afar, Carl Jung. You have probably wondered why he still watches you from afar, not speaking, not reaching, but always circling around your world like a silent planet trapped in orbit. His eyes, perhaps hidden behind screens or memories, still trace your outline through the fog of distance. It is not love as it once was, but something deeper, stranger, a tether of the psyche that refuses to dissolve. Because when two souls have mirrored each other's depths, the reflection never fades. It becomes an archetype, living, breathing, haunting. In the language of Jung, this is not about romance but projection. He does not see you, he sees what you once awakened in him, his anima, the inner feminine that dwells in every man. When he looked at you, he did not only see your face, he saw the lost parts of his own soul reflected in your gentleness, your mystery, your chaos, your light. And now, though you are gone, that reflection still burns in his unconscious, whispering like a ghost in his sleep. That is why he still watches. Not because he wants you, but because he cannot reclaim the parts of himself he left inside you. There is a cruelty in this kind of attachment, a silent longing that neither touches nor releases. He observes, hoping the image will give him peace, but the more he stares, the further peace drifts away. He cannot destroy the projection without confronting his own shadow, the fear of his own weakness, the hunger for validation, the unhealed wound of the mother. Every woman he loved before or after you is filtered through this same lens, the anima seeking wholeness. And until he faces it, he will remain the watcher, the one who lingers behind digital curtains, unable to enter or exit the stage. You might sense him sometimes, like a faint pulse in the ether, the unspoken awareness that someone, somewhere, is still thinking of you. It's not your imagination. Psychic bonds, once created, do not vanish merely because time has passed. They retreat underground, into the collective unconscious, becoming threads of energy that tug when memory stirs. Women often feel this before they understand it, the sudden heaviness, the dream that won't fade, the intuition that someone's energy has not yet let go. This is not magic. It is psychology, the invisible conversation between two unconscious minds that once recognized each other. He, on the other hand, stands at the edge of his own silence. Men like him often believe they are in control of detachment, but what they call moving on is often repression. They bury emotion under distractions, achievements, new faces. Yet the unconscious is patient, it waits beneath every success. And when the night is quiet, it returns, her voice, her laughter, her absence. Because she was never just her. She was the embodiment of everything his soul secretly longed to integrate, tenderness without fear, emotion without shame, presence without armor. And so, he watches. Not to possess, but to remember what it felt like to be alive. To touch the part of him that the world told him to kill, the part that feels deeply, that cries quietly, that yearns for beauty in a world obsessed with dominance. When he sees you, he touches that truth again. You are the mirror he cannot shatter. You are the proof that the divine feminine still exists within him, waiting to be reconciled. But this awareness, this haunting, is not your responsibility to carry. Too many women mistake his distant gaze for unfinished love, when in truth, it is unfinished work. The work of his soul, not yours. He watches because he has not yet turned inward. He still believes that healing lies outside himself, in the image of you, rather than in the shadow that he has not dared to face. And if you continue to look back, you risk being pulled into that orbit again, repeating the same unconscious dance between anima and animus, giver and seeker, savior and wounded child. You must understand this, his watching is not a compliment. It is a confession. A silent admission that he cannot yet stand before his own reflection without trembling. The real power lies not in being watched, but in learning to no longer need to be seen. When you step out of the projection, when you realize that his gaze no longer defines your worth, you reclaim something sacred. You reclaim your own archetype, the woman who is whole unto herself, no longer waiting to be recognized in someone else's eyes. Because one day, when he finally turns inward, he will stop watching. And that silence, that absence of his gaze, will not mean he has forgotten you. It will mean he has finally remembered himself. When the gaze fades and the silence deepens, something remarkable happens in the unseen spaces between two souls. The projection begins to dissolve. The man who once watched from afar begins to sense the emptiness left behind, the hollow echo of his own reflection vanishing into air. At first, he feels it as loss, as though the object of his desire has disappeared. But what truly vanishes is the illusion. The veil that once shielded him from his own depths begins to tear, thread by thread, revealing the raw undercurrent beneath, grief, longing, and the fear of insignificance. This is where Jung's shadow stands waiting, the part of him he refused to meet. The shadow holds the truths he denied, the emotions he deemed unmanly, the tenderness he repressed. It is the voice he silenced when he learned that vulnerability is weakness. And now, stripped of projection, he has nowhere to hide. That is why the watcher often turns inward too late, when the woman has already withdrawn her light. Because only in her absence does he confront the truth that what he loved was not her presence, but his reflection within her. Meanwhile, the woman begins her own awakening. For a long time, she may have mistaken his distant attention for power, the idea that being desired, even from afar, proves her worth. Society taught her to believe that visibility equals value, that to be watched is to be validated. But as the days pass, she starts to notice that his gaze is no longer nourishment. It is weight. It is the invisible thread keeping her tied to an old version of herself, one who existed primarily through someone else's perception. And so, quietly, she begins to withdraw her energy, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. This withdrawal is not an act of cruelty. It is the birth of individuation, the soul reclaiming its fragments from the projections of others. She begins to see that love without self-awareness is not intimacy, it is entanglement. What she once called connection was, in truth, an exchange of shadows. He saw in her the tenderness he lacked, she saw in him the strength she wished to mirror. Together they built a bridge made of illusions, and now that bridge collapses, not as tragedy, but as liberation. There is a sacred loneliness in this stage. It feels like standing at the edge of a vast, empty field after a storm, the air still humming with electricity, but the ground eerily quiet. Many women resist this silence because it feels like abandonment. But it is not. It is initiation. The feminine must often walk through solitude to reclaim her sovereignty. The silence is not punishment, it is purification, the washing away of every illusion that said she needed to be chosen to be whole. From afar, he watches her recede into her own light, and it both fascinates and terrifies him. The more she detaches, the more his soul trembles, because her freedom threatens the entire foundation of his ego. If she no longer exists to reflect his worth, then who is he? This question, the most painful and necessary of all, is the one that cracks him open. Jung called this the confrontation with the self, the point at which the outer world collapses, forcing the psyche to face its own center. For the woman, too, this moment becomes a mirror. She begins to notice how much of her own energy was once devoted to being understood, being desired, being seen. And now, as she walks away from that invisible stage, she learns a new form of visibility, one that does not require an audience. Her worth no longer depends on who is watching. It begins to bloom from within, silent and luminous, like a secret garden the world cannot enter. It is here, in this quiet sovereignty, that she begins to encounter her own shadow, not as darkness to be feared, but as a source of truth. She sees the patterns that once bound her, the need to fix, to heal, to prove her softness. She begins to understand that compassion without boundaries is not love, it is self-erasure. She begins to reclaim her fire, the fierce, unapologetic knowing that love cannot exist where the self is sacrificed. And somewhere in that unseen space, something shifts. The gaze that once chained her begins to dissolve like mist. His eyes, once burning with need, now soften, not because he has conquered his desire, but because he has begun to understand it. He realizes that what he sought in her was never meant to be possessed, only witnessed. And in that realization lies the first step toward his own healing. The universe, in its strange and poetic symmetry, often brings two souls together not to unite them, but to awaken them. The watcher and the watched were never enemies or lovers in the truest sense. They were mirrors, each reflecting the hidden halves of the other's unconscious. And now, as the projection fades, both are called toward something higher, the journey back to themselves. Because every watching, every longing, every quiet ache was never about the other person. It was always about the soul trying to remember its own face beneath the layers of illusion. As time passes, distance becomes more than physical, it becomes spiritual. The invisible cord that once bound two souls begins to stretch, thin, and shimmer until it becomes almost imperceptible. Yet even in its fading, there is still an echo, a quiet pulse that carries the memory of what once was sacred, though it was never fully understood. For the man who still watches from afar, the silence grows heavy. He is haunted not by her absence, but by the reflection of his own incompleteness that her presence once concealed. In the stillness of his solitude, he begins to sense a subtle truth, that his gaze, once fixated outward, was always a way to avoid turning inward. Watching her was easier than confronting the emptiness within. His obsession was not truly about love, it was about control, about clinging to an image of himself that she once illuminated. But love built on projection is never stable, it trembles under the weight of unmet needs and buried fears. Now, stripped of illusion, he must face what remains, a man divided, longing not for her body, but for his own lost soul. The feminine, in contrast, moves differently through her awakening. Once she begins to reclaim her inner landscape, she no longer lives to be perceived. She steps out of the archetype of the muse and into that of the sovereign. The transition is not without pain, for to stop being the mirror means to lose a kind of power, the subtle influence that comes from being desired. But it also means gaining something infinitely more precious, the power of self-direction. No longer defined by how others see her, she becomes the author of her own myth. This is the stage Jung called individuation, the process by which a soul integrates its scattered fragments and becomes whole. For her, it means uniting the inner masculine and feminine, the part that acts and the part that feels, the part that gives and the part that receives. She no longer needs to chase emotional safety through another's attention, because she has found it within herself. Her boundaries, once porous, now glow like golden threads around her aura, not walls, but sacred parameters that protect her essence from those who seek to consume rather than connect. For him, the same process is far more turbulent. When the anima, his inner feminine, withdraws her projection, he feels as if the world has gone dim. He searches for new faces, new distractions, hoping to reignite that lost spark. But nothing satisfies, because nothing external can replace the inner feminine he has neglected. He begins to dream of her, not as the woman she truly was, but as an archetypal figure, the guide, the muse, the mother, the forbidden light. Dreams of water, mirrors, and moonlight haunt his sleep. He senses that she represents something his soul cannot yet name, the forgotten language of feeling, intuition, and surrender. It is through this haunting that his real transformation begins. The longing that once tethered him to her image slowly redirects inward, becoming the fire that fuels his descent into the unconscious. This is the hero's underworld, the psychological night where he must meet his demons. The same demons that once caused him to seek power over love, silence over vulnerability, distance over truth. Here, he confronts the shadow, not as an enemy, but as a teacher. And slowly, he begins to integrate. Meanwhile, the woman, in her quiet strength, becomes something almost mythical in his mind, not because she is idealized, but because she embodies what he has not yet mastered, wholeness without attachment. She no longer needs to be watched to know she exists. Her stillness becomes her magnetism, her calm becomes her authority. She radiates not from effort but from essence. The kind of presence that cannot be chased, only encountered by those who have done their own inner work. And yet, in this strange dance of souls, there is no true ending. Every man who watches from afar, and every woman who learns to walk away, are participants in a timeless ritual, the reconciliation of opposites. The divine masculine must learn to feel again, the divine feminine must learn to stand alone. Only then can they meet not as reflections, but as equals. The silence between them, once filled with tension, transforms into something sacred, a space for growth rather than longing. He begins to understand that watching her was never the point. The point was awakening, hers and his. She was the catalyst that forced his soul to confront itself. He was the mirror that showed her where she had given too much away. Both were necessary. Both were medicine. And so, one day, he stops looking. Not out of indifference, but out of reverence. The act of watching has completed its purpose. The image fades, and in its place arises something quieter, purer, gratitude. Gratitude for the mirror, for the pain, for the awakening it brought. For in the grand psychology of love and loss, every ending is merely an initiation into a deeper kind of seeing. As the veil between them thins to transparency, something profound unfolds, not a reunion, but a revelation. The watcher has begun to see not her, but through her. The image that once captivated him now dissolves into light, and behind it, he encounters what Jung called the self, the totality of who he truly is, both shadow and spirit intertwined. The distance between them, which once felt like punishment, now reveals itself as the necessary space for transformation. For the soul cannot awaken while it is still clutching an illusion. He stands before his own abyss, that vast and silent inner territory most men are never taught to enter. The instinct to conquer still whispers within him, but its echo fades against the immensity of what he now feels. He sees the patterns of his past, how every woman he ever loved became a screen for his projections, mother, savior, temptress, redeemer. He sees how each pursuit was a flight from his own emptiness, how every act of desire was, at its core, a plea for reflection. And for the first time, he does not run from this truth. He allows himself to feel the grief of what he never understood, that love is not possession, and healing is not found in another's eyes. It is in this surrender that his humanity deepens. For the first time, he can look upon the memory of her, not with longing, not with guilt, but with reverence. She was never meant to be kept, she was meant to awaken him. Her withdrawal was his initiation. The same gaze that once bound him now becomes a memory of light guiding him inward. Through her reflection, he finds his own reflection, the anima within, the sacred feminine that teaches him how to feel, how to receive, how to be rather than control. And she, too, continues her own journey. Freed from the weight of being seen, she steps fully into her feminine sovereignty. No longer shaped by the gaze of others, she becomes an architect of her own inner world. The seasons of her heart shift, from yearning to serenity, from validation to quiet self-knowing. She begins to see that love, in its highest form, is not a transaction but a state of consciousness. It is the ability to hold connection without possession, compassion without self-betrayal. As she integrates her inner masculine, the decisive, protective energy that once lay dormant, she no longer seeks safety outside herself. The longing that once pulled her toward him now becomes the fuel for creation. Her purpose sharpens, her intuition speaks louder. What was once emotional chaos becomes creative fire. She embodies what Jung described as the individuated soul, one who stands at the intersection of shadow and light, no longer divided by the need to be understood. And yet, the mysterious bond between them does not vanish, it transforms. It becomes something sacred, untouchable, beyond words. Not the thread of attachment, but the golden filament of consciousness, the silent recognition between two beings who have mirrored each other into awakening. When she walks beneath the moonlight, he may still cross her mind, not as a wound, but as a whisper of gratitude. For he was the one who unknowingly handed her the mirror that led her back to herself. In the invisible world, they are no longer two halves searching for completion. They have become reflections of wholeness. The polarity that once pulled them apart, masculine and feminine, desire and restraint, watcher and watched, now harmonizes into balance. It is the eternal rhythm of the psyche, the sacred dance of opposites finding peace. The universe, in its quiet wisdom, often leads souls through heartbreak not to destroy them but to strip them of illusion. What they called love was often dependency, what they called loss was, in truth, liberation. And in this alchemy of endings, both the man and the woman discover the same truth, that to love is to let go, to release the image and embrace the essence. He no longer watches her from afar because he has turned his gaze inward. The world, once a projection screen of desire, becomes a mirror of meaning. He sees beauty not as something to grasp, but as something to embody. And she, radiant in her self-possession, no longer measures her worth by the echo of his attention. She has become the source of her own light, untouchable yet deeply alive. In the quiet convergence of their separate paths, there is no bitterness, no unfinished story, only the deep stillness of understanding. The roles have fallen away. The watcher has awakened. The watched has returned home to herself. And the bond that once bound them in pain now expands into freedom. For this is the essence of all soul connections. They enter our lives to reflect the parts of us we have forgotten, and when their work is done, they leave behind not emptiness, but expansion. Because in the end, every gaze that lingers, every silence that hurts, every distance that aches, all of it was the soul's way of saying, remember who you are. And so, the story reaches its quiet crescendo, not with reunion, but with revelation. The man who once stood in shadow now walks beneath his own light. The woman who once trembled under the weight of being seen now moves with the grace of one who no longer seeks permission to exist. What was once a thread of longing between them has become a bridge of understanding, not to cross again, but to honor what it taught them. For the watcher, the transformation was never about forgetting her. It was about remembering himself. When he looked at her across that vast emotional distance, he was, in truth, witnessing the reflection of his own unlived potential, the tenderness, the intuition, the vulnerability he had buried beneath the armor of masculinity. She became the sacred mirror, and in losing her, he found what he had been avoiding all along, the soft center of his being. The part that feels. The part that prays. The part that knows silence is not weakness, but wisdom. He no longer needs to gaze outward because his vision has turned inward, not as retreat, but as awakening. The feminine within him, once exiled, now rises like dawn over still water. He learns to nurture without control, to desire without domination, to protect without possession. The anima is no longer a ghost haunting his dreams, but a living presence guiding his choices. For the first time, he understands that the true man is not the conqueror, but the keeper of light, one who has faced his own darkness and emerged whole. And she, the one who was once watched, has become something beyond his reach, not because she is distant, but because she now resides in a higher frequency of being. Her strength no longer burns with defiance, it radiates with peace. She does not need to prove her independence or her worth. The battle for validation has ended. She walks through the world with the quiet confidence of one who knows that love is not currency, but presence. Her beauty has deepened into something sacred, not the surface allure that draws eyes, but the magnetic stillness that draws souls. She embodies the essence of what Jung called the Great Mother archetype, the nurturer, the creator, the destroyer of illusion. Yet she is also the wise woman, the one who carries her wounds as symbols of initiation rather than shame. Every scar has become a scripture, every heartbreak, a hymn. In her silence, he learns reverence. In his distance, she learns release. Both evolve beyond the childish myth of ownership into the mature truth of awareness. Their souls, once bound by projection, now bow to one another in unseen gratitude, two beings who have completed the sacred contract that brought them together. The universe, ever cyclical, will continue its rhythm, perhaps their paths will cross again, perhaps not. But if they do, it will not be as seeker and savior, not as wound and balm. It will be as two sovereigns, each whole within themselves, meeting not to complete but to celebrate. For the highest form of love is not dependence, but recognition, the silent nod between souls who see the divine reflected in each other's eyes without needing to hold it. And so, the watcher becomes the witness. His gaze, once heavy with longing, now softens with understanding. He no longer watches her to feel alive, he lives fully, and therefore sees her clearly. She, in turn, no longer fears being seen. For the woman who knows herself cannot be diminished by any gaze, she is both the flame and the space that contains it. This is the quiet power of individuation. Two souls once entangled in projection now stand apart, yet more connected than ever, not through need, but through consciousness. The polarity between them, masculine and feminine, seeing and being seen, has found equilibrium in the vast field of awareness where both dissolve into the same truth. And if one could listen closely to the silence that follows, one might hear the faint whisper of the psyche speaking through them both. You were never meant to stay in each other's lives. You were meant to awaken each other's souls. That is why he still watches from afar, and why, one day, he no longer will. Because once the lesson is complete, the watching ends. What remains is only gratitude, not for what was lost, but for what was found within. The woman turns her face toward the sun, unburdened. The man lowers his eyes, humbled but free. Between them, there is no longer a story of pursuit, but a silent exchange of recognition, the eternal acknowledgement between two souls who met in shadow so they could both return to light. And as the final echo of their connection fades into stillness, the truth stands unshaken. The woman who understands her worth does not chase, she chooses.